Well, yes, we're turning our attention now to the Zamfara politics, and we've got Abdul Mohammed, who is a legal practitioner, as well as Abubakar Yao, a political analyst, who's also a legislative aide. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the program today. Well, let me start with you, Mr. Abdul Mohammed, about the judgment in the Court of Appeal judgments concerning Zamfara elections. I mean, even if you go down memory lane, the history about all of this, for those who say that, well, the APC never had a primary in the first instance, because some APC members have said the same thing. And don't forget, this is also within the APC where they're having this skirmish. For those who say the court was right, they didn't have primaries, what's your impression of that?
Well, you know, this arose from the decision of INEC refusing to accept the nominations of the All Progressive Congress in the primaries. Now, the law is clear that INEC doesn't have that power. If you look at Section 31, Sub 1 of the Electoral Act, it did not empower INEC to reject any nomination for whatever reason. Now, we know that the High Court had said, yeah, that provision is clear. You cannot refuse a nomination for whatever reason. The Court of Appeal had now said, no, the decision is set aside. But it did not say nominations cannot be accepted from the political parties. Now, the most important thing is that these parties have participated in elections, and in the process of election, issuance of certificate of return is the conclusive part of it. It is not for INEC to refuse to issue certificate of return. It is for the Election Petition Tribunal to cancel the certificate of return if the decision of the Court of Appeal is upheld at the Supreme Court. Now, note that the decision at the Court of Appeal has no positive decision, such that if anybody takes any step, he will be seen to be going against an order of court. Fundamentally, because there is room for appeal to the Supreme Court, INEC is required to continue its statutory function that requires that immediately after the conduct of elections, it should issue certificate of return.
Let me bring in Mr. Yao on this. My apologies, Mr. Mohammed, just a minute. But Mr. Yao, could you tell us, what, from your perspective, was there primaries in Zamfara?
There was no primary election taking place in Zamfara. There was no primary election whatsoever that took place in Zamfara during that time, up to October 7th, which was the deadline for the conduct of primary elections, as contained in the schedule and timetable of the INEC regarding the 2019 primary elections. Primary election did not take place in Zamfara State. And if there was a primary election, the faction that is the aspirant of APC, who are G8. G8 means 8 governorship aspirant under the flagship of APC contesting for governorship, and other candidates who are contesting in other various positions, such as Senate, House of Representatives, and the House of Assembly. The people who went to the court to contest for the primary election, which did not take place. And we're going to Genesis, and history of what has happened.
Just hold on, Mr. Yao. When we come back, we'll allow you to take us through the genesis, hoping we'll have that time to do that. And then both of you will make your points why you think this is the case. Join us again. You're back to Sunrise. Well, Mr. Yao, you were going to tell us what, in your perspective, is the genesis of this crisis.
Okay. The genesis of this crisis in the APC in Zamfara State was, before the primary election, there were 9 contestants contesting for a governorship position in Zamfara State under the flagship of APC. And there were other contestants contesting for the other states, such as Senatorial, House of Representatives, which Zamfara has 7 House of Representatives representing the state, as well as 24 House of Assembly members that are to represent Zamfara State in the State Assembly. The governor, before the commencement of the selling of forms to the candidate of various political parties by INEC, has not declared any candidate, has not shown his direct or open interest on any candidate out of the 9. He let them go, canvass for support from the people, and at the same time, they went to their constituents all over the state to look for the vote of their candidate. Okay, there was a problem between the state governor and Senator Kabiru Marafa, a senator representing Gusau Central in APC. The problem is, due to the insecurity in Zamfara State, Senator Kabiru Marafa came out in the House and tell to the world the problem we Zamfara State people are facing as a result of the bandit that took over Zamfara State, which I can tell you now authoritatively there are over 200 villages, hamlets, and towns took over or destroy or push away the people who are residing in those towns in Zamfara State, from north to the south, east to the west, and the center of Zamfara State. Most of the villages have been took over by the bandits. And Kabiru Maraho is the only senator who came out to contest, to fight against the state governor for lackadaisical attitude toward the problem of bandits in Zamfara State. That was what caused the problem between Kabiru Maraha and the governor of Zamfara State. Then there was Congress of APC in all over Nigeria to elect the elective offices, executive of the party in all, from the ward to the national level. Then it happens that there was 2 factions at that time, Kabiru Maraha faction and the governor's faction. To the extent, during at the commencement of the primary, Senator Kabiru Maraha went to the Federal Higher Court to contest for the problem of Congress that took place at that time. The Federal Higher Court judged that all the parties, all the factions under the APC of Zamfara State is dissolved. Once they were dissolved, then Congress will not take place by indirect. That is, the primary will not take place by indirect election. That is why the National Party of APC decided to go on indirect to conduct the primary election of APC in Zamfara State.
All right. So, Mr. Mohammed, now, if in his perspective, I mean, you didn't really have a primary, and so INEC couldn't, and besides, they said you didn't meet up with the deadline. So, expecting a judgment in their favor, isn't that what some people describe as being tantamount to putting something on nothing?
Well, you see, that is why I said we have to take the perspective from the way the cases are. There are 2 sets of cases on this issue. The first is that when INEC refused to accept the nomination presented to it from Zamfara, the persons that were disgruntled initiated an action in court challenging INEC's decision to refuse the nomination. By Section 31 of the Electoral Act, subsection 1, INEC is not entitled to refuse any nomination for any reason whatsoever. Now, it is that action that got to the judgment in the High Court of Zamfara State, to the Court of Appeal now, and that is being presented, that is being submitted by way of appeal to the Supreme Court for determination. Whatever the Supreme Court will decide will be tied towards the provisions of Section 31 of the Electoral Act, whether INEC has the power to refuse a nomination that is presented to it. Now, the Senator Kabiru Marafa faction did in fact go to the Federal High Court in Abuja to challenge the process of nomination. You will recall that the Federal High Court did say that because there was no primaries in line with the directive of the National Committee of the party, that whatever nomination that is sent to INEC is nullified. But when the matter went to the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal found that that action that was initiated at the Federal High Court in Abuja challenging the primaries was done outside the statutory time provided for in the Constitution, the fourth alteration. And it also found that because there was a case in Zamfara, at the time the case in the Federal High Court was initiated, they ought to have filed it as a counterclaim in that court, and it struck out the action. So we should get it clear. What is going to happen at the Supreme Court is not a contest of whether or not there was in fact a primary, no. The contest at the Supreme Court is whether or not INEC has the statutory powers to refuse a nomination duly presented to it pursuant to Section 31 of the Electoral Act. So it will not be tantamount to putting something on nothing at all. You can see that the two cases are different streams. Their waters have not yet mixed. Maybe
Mr. Mohammed, we get what you're saying here, but you also know that it's the same law that empowers INEC to observe the primaries of every political party. Couldn't that be the reason for which INEC is saying there was no primaries, consequently we will not accept any nomination, because they ought to have observed the primaries, but unfortunately there was none for them to observe?
I agree absolutely that INEC has a statutory duty to observe elections. But the statutes are very clear as to the role INEC is to take. It provides clearly that where INEC is to go and monitor, the act itself of INEC monitoring primaries have been decided in several cases to be merely administrative. So whether INEC monitors or INEC doesn't monitor does not affect the validity of the primaries. But notification is what is critical as to the conduct of the primaries. That is one. Now, the persons that are entitled to complain where primaries are not properly conducted is as contained in Section 87 of the Electoral Act. Are aspirants who ought to have participated in the primaries and who are not happy with the outcome. INEC cannot complain because Section 31 says it should not reject any nomination by any reason whatsoever. That is the wording there.
Yeah, but
any reason whatsoever.
Isn't that part of what Mr. Yao is raising about those who should have contested who are not happy that there was no such thing?
Yeah, those people who are not happy that there was no such nomination ought to have gone to court. And the Court of Appeal have found positively that those persons that went to court, they went to court after the expiration of 14 days, and as such, their action is statute barred. That is the decision of the Court of Appeal Abuja. So we should now await the decision of the Supreme Court, because again, we should be careful. INEC's statutory powers are clearly defined. So the section that says INEC should monitor elections did not say if you monitor elections and the members do not abide the provisions of the Constitution or the law, reject their nomination.